Assalamualaikum and a very good day to the panels. My name is Muhammad Danish Farhan bin Muhammad Arisun and I am a final year student from the Faculty of Sports Science and Recreation. Today, I will be presenting my research proposal defense for SRT 656. The title of my project is The Effects of Cold Water Immersion versus Passive Recovery on Power Output and Heart Rate Recovery among National Track Cyclists. To give you a quick overview, my research basically looks at how track cyclists recover after an intense sprint. In track cycling, they have to do repeated high intensity efforts with very short breaks in between. I want to find out if jumping into cold water bath actually helps them keep their power up and recovers their heart rate faster, or if just sitting down and resting normally gives the same result. All right, let's look at the background of our study. First, the big problem in elite sports, especially in track cycling events like keirin or individual sprints, is that athletes have to race back to back on the exact same day. When they have to do multiple maximum sprints with very short breaks, it causes massive muscle fatigue. By the time they get to the final rounds, their speed and power drop heavily. To see how we can fix this, my testing framework isolates a few key things. What are changing our independent variable is using an ice bath combined with a short active priming warm up, and we are comparing that against standard passive rest where the athlete just sits down. What we are tracking, which is our dependent variables, are the actual cycling power output from the bike and how fast their heart stabilizes. This brings us to what we call the ice bath paradox. We know from past research that ice baths are great for clearing out lactic acid and calming the heart down. But the catch is that extreme cold also stiffens the muscles, which temporarily takes away the athlete's explosive power. That's why my study acts on an active priming phase right after the ice bath. It basically wakes up the nervous system so their legs aren't like blocks of ice when they start sprinting again. Finally, the missing gap in the literature is that most past studies only tested everyday active gym goers or long distance runners. They completely miss elite sprinters who have completely different fast twitch muscle profiles. On top of that, there isn't enough high precision data out there that combines live voltage tracking with heart rate sensors during repeated time trials. Moving on to the problem statement. In elite track cycling tournaments, the schedule is incredibly tight. Riders have to maintain massive explosive power across back-to-back intense races like Kirin heats and the finals just a short time later. Because the efforts are so extreme, they suffer from both muscles and nerve fatigue. Right now, sport practitioners and coaches still lack a proven sport-specific recovery routine to stop performance from dropping during these multi-heat events. A lot of times, they are just guessing what works best. This brings us again to the ice bath paradox. On the good side, we know cold water immersion changes blood flow to clear out metabolic waste and calm the heart down quickly. But here is the bad side. Extreme cold causes vasoconstriction, meaning it severely narrows the blood vessels, lower the muscle temperatures, and temporarily numbs nerve sensitivity. The conflict here is that while the ice bath refreshes the body, it temporarily freezes the muscle while completely destroys the athlete's immediate explosive force for the very next race. If you put a rider straight back on the track with cold legs, they can't contract their muscles with fast enough to win. Alright, the second part of the problem comes down to the critical research gaps. First, a lot of past studies use the wrong test groups. They mostly tested everyday active individuals, weekend warriors, or endurance runners. But the body and heart systems of a marathon runner operate completely different from elite track sprinters who rely on massive leg muscles, volume, and explosive, which is type 2x fast twitch fibers. Second, there is a big lack of synchronized data. Most past research didn't match live millisecond level heart tracking with high frequency bite voltage sensors at the exact same time during repeated trials. So, what this study solves is simple. By testing actual elite national level athletes, we want to determine if pairing an S bus with targeted active priming warm up can give us the best of both sides, which is protecting their explosive peak and mean power while still optimizing their heart rate recovery. We want to give coaches a real blueprint they can use trackside. Now, let's talk about the main purpose of the study. Overall, we want to find out if combining an ice bath with a quick targeted warm-up, what we call active priming, can successfully save an athlete's sprint performance, specifically looking at their peak and mean power. At the same time, we want to see if it speeds up their heart stabilization during back-to-back 1 kilometer time trials. To break it down, we have three main goals here. The first one, we want to solve the ice bath dilemma. We are testing if this quick post-cooling warm-up can actually bring back explosive muscle power and wake up those numb nerves, but without wiping out the excellent heart cooling benefits the ice bath just gave them. It is all about finding out perfect balance where the heart is recovered but the legs are still explosive. Second, we are closing the population gap. Like I mentioned earlier, we need to move away from generic data that tests everyday active people or regular university students who don't train at an elite level. This study aims to provide high-precision, synchronized laboratory evidence that is specifically tailored for our elite national track cyclists. And finally, the ultimate goal is trackside application. We don't want this to just be a theory inside a research paper. We want to turn this into a practical, evidence-based recovery blueprint. This is something coaches and physiologists at the National Sport Institute of Malaysia, which is ISN, can actually use right next to the velodrome track to protect our riders' speed when they are dealing with tight back-to-back tournament schedules. Moving on, we have a research question. To keep our study highly focused, we have broken it down into three specific questions. First, looking at the ice bath group, we want to know what are the changes in sprint performance, specifically looking at the power output and mean power output and heart rate recovery when elite cyclists use the cold water immersion protocol. This helps us to see how they bounce back after the cooling and priming. Second, looking at our control group, we ask what are the changes in the same sprint performance and heart rate recovery when these elite cyclists use standard passive rest. This gives us the baseline to compare against. And finally, research question 3 is our big comparison. What are the significant differences in performance and heart rate between the ice bath protocol and passive rest among elite national track cyclists? This is the core question of the whole project because it directly tells us which recovery method actually gives our athletes a winning edge. Now, moving on to our research objectives on this side. These objectives perfectly align with the question we just went through. First, for research objective 1, we want to analyze the sprint performance, specifically the peak power and mean power, and the heart rate recovery of these elite track cyclists after they complete the cold water immersion protocol. Second, the research objective 2, we want to run the exact same analysis on sprint performance and heart recovery, but for the control group using standard passive rest. This shows us their baseline fatigue when they don't get any active cooling treatment at all. And finally, research objective 3 is to compare the explicit differences in power preservation and heart stabilization between the ice bath protocol and passive rest. To put it simply, we want to look at the actual wattage data from the bike to see how much power they can hold onto for that second race and map out if the ice bath significantly beats just sitting down. Next, we will talk about research hypotheses. First, for HO, which is our null hypothesis, it states that there is no significant difference between the mechanical performance metrics, which are peak power output and mean power output, and the cardiac autonomic kinetics, meaning the heart rate recovery, when comparing the cold water immersion intervention against the passive recovery control. In plain terms, HO assumes that jumping into the ice bath and doing the warm-up won't change the data at all for our national track cyclists. On the other hand, we have H1, which is our alternative hypothesis. This states that there will be a significant difference in both our power metrics and our heart rate recovery between the two recovery methods. When we run our statistical test later, our main goal is to see if we can successfully reject the null hypothesis and prove that our ice bath protocol actually makes a real difference in the numbers. Now let's talk about why this study is so significant. As you can see on the slides, we look at this from two angles: trackside application and contribution to sports science knowledge. First, for trackside and practical application, we are offering an optimized tournament strategy. It gives coaches a realistic way to balance lowering an athlete's heart rate while keeping their leg power explosive. We are creating an objective readiness tool. Instead of just asking a rider, hey, are you ready to go? Coaches can just use live heart rate recovery data to scientifically proven if they are physically ready. What's really interesting here is the athlete's self-awareness piece. A lot of times after an ice bath, an athlete feels refreshed mentally because the cold wakes them up, but their muscles are actually too stiff to perform. This study helps them understand that feeling recovered is often just a psychological illusion, and their muscles might not be ready to explode into a sprint yet. Second, looking at the contribution to sports science knowledge, we are capturing true elite sprinter data. We are filling a major gap by studying national sprinters with fast twitch muscle profiles instead of marathon runners or active students. We are also setting a new life tracking standard by syncing millisecond level heart telemetry with high sensitivity bike power sensors. At the same time, this finally delivers a clear blueprint to solve thermal paradox, showing exactly how active priming can reverse that cold muscle stiffness. So next, the moving on to this slide, the significance of this research goes beyond just elite levels or elite athletes, as I can say. It also has a massive societal and national impact. In a sport like track cycling, where winning is decided by mere fraction of seconds, having a data-driven recovery plan gives our national athletes a huge competitive edge to bring home medals and drive national pride for Malaysia. When our elite riders succeed on the world stage, it creates a powerful grassroots inspiration. It acts as a spark that gets young kids excited about picking up cycling and joining structured athletic training. Finally, there is a public health trickle down effect. The high performance safety rules where we learn in the lab can be translated down to the local fitness communities and amateur cycling clubs. By sharing these recovery signs, we can help educate everyday sports enthusiasts on how to properly cool down, avoid painful overtraining injuries, and protect themselves from the sudden cardiovascular stress after heavy workouts. All right, let's look at the delimitations and the limitations of this study. This slide sets the boundaries of what we are choosing to focus on and how we keep our data clean. For our delimitations, which are the choices I made to narrow down this project, we are testing exactly 16 elite male national track sprinters, which is aged 19 to 25, who specialize in the keirin and individual sprints. The specific age range is crucial because it represents their peak physical window for explosive power. Our intervention is a 15-minute ice bath combined with active priming compared against standard passive rest. For the actual performance test, they will do back-to-back all-out 1 kilometer time trials across 2 separate days. We are giving them a strict 72-hour washout gap in between trials. This length of time is mandatory to ensure their muscle glycogen stores are completely replenished and any neural fatigue is gone, preventing day 1 testing from ruining day 2 data. This will all take place in National Sports Institute, which is ISN laboratory, using the Wattbike Pro and Polar H10 heart rate sensors. To keep our scope tightly managed, we are only tracking power output and heart rate recovery, no invasive blood work or long-term tracking. Now, every study has limitations, but we have put strict controls in place to handle them. First, 16 sprinters is a small group. To control for this, we use a crossover design. Because every athlete tests both methods, each rider serves as his own baseline, which statistically bypasses small sample size issue. Second, a lab environment isn't a real velodrome. To fix this, we are strictly standardizing the lab's temperature and humidity to perfectly mimic actual indoor track condition. Third, everyday variations in sleep and food can mess up a rider's wattage. We are controlling this by enforcing mandatory 24-hour food logs and a strict 72-hour rest period, completely free of heavy training before they even start their first test. Finally, since we aren't tracking blood or core temperature, we protect our data by doing strict daily calibrations of the watt bikes and polar sensors to guarantee 100% accurate power and heart metrics. Next, let's quickly define the operational terms we are using in this study so everything is completely clear. As you can see on the slide, we have broken them down into our recovery methods and our performance metrics. First, cold water immersion or CWI simply means having the athlete sit in an ice water bath for 15 minutes. The goal here is to lower their muscle tissue temperature and help clear out metabolic waste. Second, active priming is a short, low intensity warm up that the rider does immediately after the ice bath. This is the key step to wake up the muscles and restores those explosiveness reaction that the cold water slows down. Third one, passive recovery is our control condition. This is where the athlete sits quietly in a normal room temperature environment for 15 minutes to allow natural metabolic recovery without any active cooling interventions or extra movement. Now for the metrics we are measuring on the watt bikes and sensors. The first one is peak power output or PPO. Is the highest single burst of wattage or explosive power the rider hits during the very first few seconds of the sprint. Basically like the initial kick out of the starting gate. The second one is mean power output or MPO. is the average wattage they can actually maintain across the entire 1 kilometer time trial. This shows us their power endurance as they grind through the main laps. And finally, heart rate recovery or HRR tracks how fast the rider's heart rate drops in beats per minute during the early race phase right after they cross the finish line. Next, we are moving to the literature review. First, looking at the 1 kilometer demands, which track cyclists often call the kilo. This event is an absolute killer. According to Nova et al. 2021, it requires an instant shift from complete rest to maximum effort. This causes a rapid drain of the athlete's immediate ATPPC energy stores and create a severe lactic acid and hydrogen ion buildup, which heavily drops their performance if they have to race again. For neuromuscular power, sprints rely completely on immediate recruitment of explosive type 2X fast-twitch muscle fibers, as noted by Douglas et al. 2021. To track how central and peripheral fatigue affect his power, Valenzuela et al. 2021 point out that using a laboratory gold standard, Watt Bike Pro ergometer is the most reliable way to capture accurate peak and mean wattage. Finally, for the cardiovascular reset, Zhu et al. 2024 state that post-race, the heart must quickly shift from a high-stress fight-or-flight mode back to a rest and digest state through vagal reactivation. Shafazik et al. 2022 proved that we can track this autonomic transition cleanly using ECG accurate polar H10 chest straps, which are much more accurate than standard wristwatch. So on this next slide, we look at recovery mechanisms and why the elite sprinter profile matters. For cold water immersion at 10 degrees Celsius to 15 degrees Celsius, the science worked in two ways. First, Xiao et al. 2023 highlight the thermal effect which narrows blood vessels to flush out leg waste and reduce tissue swelling. Second, Moore et al. 2022 talk about hydrostatic pressure. Basically, the water pressure acts like a full body compression sleeve, forcing pool metabolic waste out of the legs and back into central circulation. In contrast, Wewelhoff et al. 2022 show that the passive rest baseline relies entirely on unassisted homeostatic system. As Dudley et al. 2021 explained, it lacks that extra circulatory push or muscle pumping action which leaves blood pooling in the lower legs and extends muscle fatigue. This is exactly why elite athletes need specific data. Bellinger et al. 2023 point out that the national sprinters have massive leg muscle areas and highly specialized fast twitch profiles, sometimes up to 80% fast twitch fibers. Brown et al. 2022 heavily emphasized that generic data from everyday active college students cannot accurately predict how an elite track cyclist body recover under intense tournament stress. To wrap up the literature review, let's look at the scientific conflicts, gaps, and our solutions. Currently, there are big cryotherapy debates. Xiao et al. 2023 showed that the past literature is highly inconsistent regarding ideal water temperatures, ranging anywhere from 8 degrees Celsius to 18 degrees Celsius. There is also an ongoing conflict by Horta et al. 2021 over whether that immediate cold shock actually speeds up or delays heart rate stabilization. But the most critical omission in the past research is the time of day bias. Vital et al. 2021 and Facer Charles et al. 2021 showed that most historical studies and fail to control the circadian rhythms because muscle power and heart dynamics naturally fluctuate throughout the day due to changes in core body temperature. Testing athletes at random times introduces massive data errors. Our study provides strict methodological solutions to fix this. First, for circadian control, Kandemir et al. 2022 suggests locking the testing time. We are locking all of our testing at a strict 800-hour baseline to eliminate any biological clock bias. Second, we are following gold standards by using a counterbalanced randomized crossover design, which Hacksteden et al. 2015 consider the absolute gold standard for sports medicine. Of course, all of this is done in full ethical compliance with the Declaration of Helsinki. Now, let's look at the conceptual framework of this study, which maps out exactly how our recovery variables connect to our final performance outcomes. Starting at the very top, we have our independent variables split into two distinct paths. On the left is our experimental protocol where the athletes undergo 15 minutes of cold water immersion at 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, immediately followed by active priming, which is our low intensity re warm up. On the right is our control protocol, which where the athletes undergo standard passive recovery, meaning they just sit completely still. To ensure our data remains highly accurate and free of outside noise, both protocols are filtered through our standardized confounding variables. We are controlling for everything here using a highly homogeneous group of 16 elite male national track sprinters, locking the data collection at a strict 800-hour baseline for circadian rhythm control using identical calibrated watt-bite probe ergometers and keeping the ISN laboratory climate completely standardized. This brings us to the core of the framework, the physiological mechanisms. For the experimental group, the ice bath triggers immediate thermal and hydrostatic effects, reducing local muscle inflammation and accelerating metabolic waste clearance. Then, the active priming step kicks in to restore muscle temperature and wake up those heavy, fast twitch type 2X fibers. Simultaneously, the cold exposure triggers cardiac mechanisms like cold-induced fluid shifts and baroreflex activation, which heavily influences how the heart resets. In contrast, the passive baseline relies purely on unassisted homeostasis. Without the active warm-up step, the riders experience prolonged neuromuscular depression and a much slower clearance of metabolic byproducts because their muscles stay cold and sluggish. Finally, at the bottom of the chart, these physiological pathways lead directly to our dependent variables. We track these using two primary outcomes categories. Number one is our mechanical performance metrics, which give us our peak power output and mean power output from the watt bike, and our cardiac autonomic kinetics, which give us our exact heart rate recovery numbers from our telemetry sensors. Now let's look at the actual blueprint of the study, which is our research design. As detailed on this slide, we are utilizing a true experimental crossover design. To break that down statistically, we are running a 2 times 2 factorial matrix. This allows us to evaluate the exact interaction effects of our intervention, which is the ice bath plus priming versus passive rest across time, meaning we compare their baseline pre-test performance in time trial 1 against their post-test performance in time trial 2. Our participants are our homogeneous group of 16 elite male national track sprinters, and all testing takes place in the environmentally controlled Sport Science Lab at the National Sport Institute ISN. To see exactly how this plays out, let's follow the flow chart on the right. We start with all 16 sprinters and use envelope randomization to split them into two balanced groups of 8. This is crucial step because it completely eliminates selection bias and ensures both groups are baseline equivalent. In trial 1, sequence group 1 completes their baseline time trial 1, undergoes our 15 minutes cold water immersion and active priming intervention, and immediately smashes out time trial 2. Simultaneously, sequence group 2 acts as our control. They do time trial 1, sit through 15 minutes of standard passive recovery at a net neutral 24 degrees Celsius, and then complete time trial 2. Once trial 1 is done, we enforce a strict 72-hour washout period. This length of time is mandatory for absolute physical rest, ensuring a full physiological and neuromuscular reset so that any residual fatigue or muscle soreness from the first day is completely eradicated before the crossover. After those 3 days of rest, the groups flip for trial 2. Group 1 now goes through the passive rest control protocol, while Group 2 undergoes the ice bath and active priming intervention. Throughout both trials, our calibrated watt bikes capture peak power and mean power, while our high fidelity Polar H10 telemetry monitors their heart rate recovery at exactly minute 1 and minute 2 post sprint. Finally, all this data is run through a repeated measures ANOVA to analyze the exact intervention by time interaction. Next, let's break down our sampling strategy, which is you can see outlined on this slide. For a high performance study like this, we cannot just recruit everyday active individuals. Our target population is strictly elite track cyclists, specifically Kirin and sprint specialists who are currently training under high performance programs at the National Sport Institute ISN. Because of this highly specialized criteria, our sampling technique is purposive sampling. This allows us to enforce strict homogeneity across the entire cohort, ensuring every single participant is a true physiological match in terms of training age, explosive fast twitch muscle profile, and baseline conditioning. This brings us our final sample size to exactly 16 sprinters. By utilizing a crossover design, we split them into two perfectly balanced sequences of 8 versus 8, which completely eliminates order bias. Now let's look at the mathematical and statistical justification behind this sample size on the next slide. As you can see here on the slide, we didn't just guess our sample size. We back it up with an a prior G power analysis. Looking at our input parameters in the G-Power software, we selected the F-test family with a repeated measures ANOVA as our statistical test. We set our effect size F at 0.35, which is conservative moderate to large effect standard for high performance athletic interventions. With our alpha set at 0.05, four total measurements tracked across the trials, and a high correlation among repeated measures at 0.70, the software calculated an absolute mathematical minimum of 9 of n equal 9 participants to reach a baseline statistical power of 85.5%. So why did we target 16 athletes instead of just stopping at 9? We did this for three massive methodological reasons. First, symmetry. A crossover design requires absolute balance. An odd number like 9 would force a biased 5 versus 4 group split, which introduces pacing or learning bias. Moving to 16 allows a perfectly symmetrical 8 versus 8 distribution. Second, attrition insurance. Elite national track sprinters are under immense physical stress. Since our protocol requires a strict 72-hour washout period between highly demanding back-to-back 1 kilometer time trial trials, we needed a robust safety cushion. Starting with 16 guarantees that even if we lose athletes to unexpected injury, illness, or overtraining mid-study, we will never drop below our mathematical floor of 9. And third, enhanced power. Pushing our sample size from the minimum of 9 up to 16 homogeneous elite subjects drives our final statistical power closer to 95%, maximizing the reliability and validity of our final data. So let's move on to look at our strict eligibility criteria. So moving forward, let's look at our eligibility framework on this slide. To guarantee the internal validity of our data, we establish highly stringent inclusion and exclusion boundaries. For our inclusion criteria, we focus on three physical pillars: elite competitive status. Every participant must be an active national or international level athlete in explicit track sprint categories, specifically the Kirin, match sprint, or team sprint. Second, they must be in their homeostatic training phase, meaning they are in a peak training block to ensure fully adapted, stable baseline metabolic threshold. Third, we required absolute musculoskeletal integrity, meaning they are 100% injury-free for the past 3 months. This is critical control that prevents any subtle biomechanical compensations or asymmetric power distributions on the watt bike flywheel during an all-out effort. On the right side, our exclusion criteria are tightly dialed into our specific protocol variables. First, we filter out medical and safety anomalies, excluding anyone with known underlying cardiovascular or respiratory abnormalities that could present critical risk during maximal exertion. During we ac- Second, we account for thermal intolerance. We strictly exclude any athlete with a confirmed cold temperature hypersensitivity, such as Raynaud's phenomenon, due to the intense physiological stress of our 10 degrees Celsius water immersion. Finally, we eliminate biochemical and ergogenic noise, disqualifying anyone who has introduced or modified structural metabolic supplements like beta-alanine or creatine cycline within the last 6 weeks, as this would artificially distort our baseline power metrics. This double layer vetting process ensures our finding represent pure physiological responses. Now let's look at our testing instrumentation. Next, let's look at our research instrumentation, specifically the tools we are using to capture mechanical and cardiac data. To measure mechanical performance, we are utilizing the Wattbike Pro Cycle ergometer. Our primary target metrics are pre and post intervention peak power output and mean power output. Because we are testing elite track sprinters who generate massive power in fraction of second, standard stationary bikes won't cut it. The Wattbike Pro utilizes an internal load cell that samples force parameters at a high frequency rate of 100 Hz across every single pedal revolution. This means it captures 100 data points per second, ensuring we don't miss the exact moment peak power is reached. For empirical validation, this system independently proven to align with gold standard SRM crank power meters within a minimal variance of plus minus 1.5% based on the classic validation study by Driller and colleagues. To track cardiac autonomic kinetics, we are using the Polar H10 chest strap sensor. We are looking at continuous RR intervals, peak heart rate, peak heart rate and post-exercise heart rate recovery at minutes 1 and 2. To ensure maximum signal fidelity, we use telemetric tracking via three skin contact electrodes prepared with a standardized conductive gel to eliminate any movement artifact. The Polar H10 is a highly respected tool in sports cardiology. It has been validated as a true alternative to cumbersome multi-lab laboratory ECG systems boasting a near-perfect correlation coefficient of R more than 0.99, even during sternest maximum exertion movement as proven by Schweizer and Gligan-Amann. Let's look at how we control our testing environment and baseline physiology on the next slide. Continuing with our instrumentation, this slide outlines our physiological baseline controls and our therapeutic recovery setups. Before an athlete even touches a bike, we must confirm their physiological baseline control. We employ the 8-point visual urine color chart index by Armstrong and colleagues to verify systemic euhydration upon participant arrival. We enforce a strict inclusion threshold where athletes must score between 1 and 3. The methodological rationale here is absolute data protection. This completely isolates our datasets from hypohydration artifacts. If a rider arrives dehydrated, it will artificially elevate the exercising heart rate and delay their core body cooling, which would completely corrupt our recovery data. Finally, look at our therapeutic recovery environments. For our experimental intervention, we use a specialized experimental cryotherapy system. This is a deep stainless steel immersion tank equipped with automated cooling, locked strictly at 10 degrees Celsius in plus minus 0.5 degrees Celsius. We verify this temperature constantly via dual suspended digital thermometers to ensure there is zero thermal drift during 15-minute exposure. For our control condition, we utilize a passive control environment. This is a specialized environmental chamber calibrated to a stable neutral ambient temperature of 24 degrees Celsius plus minus 1 degree Celsius, where athletes undergo an unassisted seated rest. By standardizing these physical environments down to the decimal point, we ensure that any performance differences we find are exclusively due to the priming protocol itself. Now let's move on to our actual data collection procedure. Now, let's dive into the core of our methodology on slide, which it outlines our step-by-step research procedure. This is a highly standardized 60-minute experimental timeline that begins at exactly 8 a.m. upon participant arrival. Phase 1 is our baseline and vitals block, lasting from minute 0 to 15. Here, we conduct a strict 24-hour pre-trial compliance screening to ensure zero caffeine, alcohol, or heavy training. We then verify systemic hydration using the urine color index, strictly requiring a score between 1 and 3, before preparing the skin with conductive gel and synchronizing our Polar H10 telemetry. Phase 2 focuses on fatigue induction from minute 15 to 30. The athletes perform a 10-minute standardized warm-up featuring two 5-second euro sprints to fully activate fast twitch motor units. Immediately following, they blast through a 1 kilometer time trial 1. This all-out effort induces severe anaerobic exhaustion, and we lock their baseline peak power, mean power, and maximum heart rate. Phase 3 tracks transition kinetics over a strict 120-second window. The riders undergo a standardized active transfer to the recovery zone while we continuously monitor continuous RR intervals to track immediate vagal tone restoration and lock heart rate recovery at minutes 1 and 2. Phase 4 is our 15 minutes crossover intervention arm. Depending on the sequence block, the athlete undergoes either condition A, a 15-minute torso immersion in our automated 10 degrees Celsius ice bath, or condition B, 15 minutes of sedentary rest in the neutral 24 degree chamber. The telemetric heart rate is locked precisely at minutes 5, 10, and 15 to track thermal and cardiac kinetics. Phase 5 is our crucial neuromuscular neuropriming stage from minute 47 to minute 55. This is a vital 8-minute window where the athlete is towel dried, remounts the watt bike, performs a 3-minute active re-warm up spin at 50% heart rate max, following by 3 minutes of passive rest. The core physiological rationale here is to serve as a strategic countermeasure to reset muscle spindle sensitivity and eliminate the neural blunting or sluggishness caused by the intense cold exposure. Finally, phase 6 executes the final performance verification from minutes 55 to 60. The sprinters unleash 1 kilometer time trial 2 under environmental and resistance conditions 100% identical to their first trial. Force parameters are sampled via our internal load cells at 100 Hz to capture post-intervention peak power and mean power. Ultimately, as shown in the center equation, we process that matrix to evaluate our performance preservation ratio, calculating TT2 output divided by TT1 baseline multiplied by 100 to determine exactly how effectively our priming protocol protected explosive performance compared to the passive less. Let's look at how we process this data statistically in the final section. To conclude our methodology section, let's look at our statistical analysis framework on slide. We have structured a rigorous multi-layered statistical approach to ensure our final insights are both mathematically sound and practically meaningful. First, for our descriptive and normality distribution, all biophysical and mechanical performance data will be expressed as M plus minus SD. To justify using parametric inferential statistics, we strictly mandate the Shapiro-Wilk test to verify data normality across all tracking blocks. This specific test is highly critical because our sample size is n less than 50, making it the most powerful tool to detect any skewness or deviations from a normal distribution. Second, our inferential modeling will utilize a 2 times 2 repeated measures ANOVA. This within factors model perfectly matches our crossover designs. Factor A isolates the condition, comparing cold water immersion directly against our passive recovery control. Factor B tracks time, comparing baseline performance in TT1 against post-recovery performance in TT2 to protect our model against structural assumptions. Our sphericity guardrail will be evaluated via Mockley test. If the assumption of sphericity is violated, we will automatically apply the greenhouse gazer correction to mathematically adjust our degrees of freedom. Finally, look at our significance and magnitude threshold. Statistical significance is locked at an priori floor of p less than 0.05. If a significant condition by time interaction effect is identified, localized differences will be isolated using pairwise t-test equipped with a Bonferroni adjustment. This is an essential control to completely eliminate type 1 error inflation from running multiple comparisons. To round out the analysis, we look beyond pure p-values to calculate practical effect size. We will apply partial eta squared for our primary ANOVA main effects and cohens D for localized pairwise variation. This ensures we can report not just mathematical significance, but the actual real-world magnitude of the recovery intervention on elite sports performance. Thank you. That's all from me. Bye.